to the first installment of the Flyleaf concert series. We've been doing shows, dramatic plays and musicals for the past 2.5 seasons. And now we are so honored to have our first concert series installment all the way from Bradford area, New Hampshire, the Hardtacks. So thank you so much for coming. I'm pretty sure none of us were around during the Civil War, but this is as close as you can get to it. Authentic music, actual readings, visuals. It doesn't get any more authentic than this. So without further ado, the Hardtacks. Thank you.
So let's start the show with a medley of tunes for Steve Foster, and let's see if we can get this going.
piano may do for lovesick girls who lace themselves to skeletons and lunch on chalk, pickles, and slate pencils, but give me the banjo. When you want genuine music, music that'll come right home to you like a bad quarter, suffuse your system like strychnine whiskey, go right through you like Brandis pills, ramify your constitution like the measles, and break out on your hide like the pin feather pimples on a picked goose. When you want all this, just smash your piano and invoke the glory beaming banjo.
Oh, the time is never dreary, the darky never grows. The ladies never weary of the rattling of the hose. So again, Susanna, I guess I love you. From the old piano and the banjo's out of tune. Sing, ring, ring, the banjo, I like that good old song. Get my own true love, oh, where you been so long? So we'll do a song by Mr. Wallace Willis, who grew up on the plantations as a slave, and after the war went out to become a Choctaw freedman in Oklahoma. And he was singing the song out in his fields when it was overheard by the Fisk Jubilee singers traveling through the area. They picked up the song, put it in their programs, and we all know it today. But it does, we like to point out, this is one of the songs in our program that does bear a lot of musical DNA from Africa. We have call and response, we have a pentatonic scale, and a couple other bits that you find in a lot of traditional West African songs. So it is a spiritual. Well, I looked toward Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home, but a band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Swing, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing, sweet chariot. Carry me home. When you get there,
harvest blast, the pangs of transformation. Not painlessly doth God recast and mold anew the nation. Hot burns the fire where wrongs expire, nor stares the hand that from the land uproots the ancient evil. The handbreadth cloud the sages feared, its bloody rain is dropping. The poison plant the fathers spared, all else is overtopping. East, west, south, north, it curses the earth. All justice dies, and fraud and lies live only in its shadow.
Well, you folks here in Massachusetts sure had your share of abolitionist poets and reverends and the like. Up in New Hampshire, we have the Hutchinson family, who made a name for themselves touring around, starting in the 1840s. And they toured actively through the war. And one of their songs that many of their songs started as poems and then got set to music. One of their first, I believe their first abolitionist song that they made their name on is Get Off the Track. And it was 1844. Old Dan Tucker had come out the year before and taken the minstrel world by storm with the Virginia Minstrels playing it and other bands. So they figured, since everybody's already singing Old Dan Tucker, they'd take Old Dan Tucker and set new words to it to suit their own political agenda. And they came up with the most powerful, most fast metaphor, the metaphor for speed and strength that they could tie abolition to. And they came up with Get Off the Track. So this will be like Old Dan Tucker, except instead of singing, get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way, Old Dan Tucker, you're too late to come to supper. As the Hutchinsons tended to do, they changed the words every chorus, right? So it's a very different kind of song to sing along to from Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, where every other line we could jump in with that call and response format, right? Just listen for the high note call, and we'll repeat each chorus, so people get a chance to sing along. So when I go, get off the track, get off the track, get off the track, every station, clear the track for emancipation. Get off the track, get off the track, get off the track, every station, clear the tracks for emancipation. See the car, emancipation, rise majestic through our nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty of the nation's glory. Get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way, clear the station, clear the tracks for emancipation. Get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way, clear the station, clear the tracks for emancipation. First of all, the car and greater speeds the dauntless liberator. Onward cheer amidst hosannas and the waving of free banners. Clear the way, clear the way, clear the way. Spread your banners, all the people shout hosannas. Clear the way, clear the way, clear the way. Spread your banners, all the people shout hosannas. Frightened, run in all directions, merchants, editors, physicians, lawyers, priests, and politicians. Get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way, clear the station, clear the tracks for emancipation. Get out of the way, oh, get out of the way, oh, get out of the way, every station, clear the tracks for emancipation. Let the ministers of churches leave behind sectarian lurches. Jump on board that car of freedom. Here it be too late to sound the alarm! Sound the alarm! Sound the alarm! Sound the alarm! Hope it's thunder. Here too late, you'll see your blunder. Sound the alarm! Oh, sound the alarm! Sound the alarm! Hope it's thunder. Here too late, you'll see your blunder. Politicians gazed astounded when at first our bell resounded. Freight trains are coming, tell those boxes, bring your votes and ballot boxes. Jump for your lives! Jump for your lives! Jump for your lives, politicians! Jump your nearest close position. Jump for your lives! Jump for your lives! Oh, jump for your lives, politicians! Jump your nearest close position. Suffrage never changed. See the people run to meet us at the depot. Thousands greet us, all take seats with emancipation. We're the train of emancipation. Huzzah, huzzah! Huzzah, huzzah! Emancipation. We'll bless our happy nation. Huzzah, huzzah! Emancipation, soon we'll bless our happy nation.
For Harriet Ann Jacobs.
Miss Jacobs.
Oh, you happy free woman, contrast your New Year's Day with that of the poor bound woman. With you it is a pleasant season, and the light of the day is blessed. Friendly wishes meet you everywhere, and gifts are showered upon you. But to the slave mother, New Year's Day comes laden with peculiar sorrows. She sits on her cold cabin floor, watching the children who may all be torn from her the next morning. And often does she wish that she and they might die before the day dawns. She may be an ignorant creature, degraded by the systems that has brutalized her from childhood. But she has a mother's instinct and is capable of feeling a mother's agonies. On one of these sale days, I saw a mother lead 7 children to the auction block. She knew that some of them would be taken from her, but they took all. Instances of this kind are of daily, yea, of hourly occurrence.
So yeah, this is one of the tunes. Instead of writing for the minstrel stage, Mr. Foster is definitely writing for the parlor here. So he writes it in a more standard English, and he writes it for the growing middle class to buy a copy of and play on their piano or banjo in the parlor. Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, while we all song with the Lord. There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered all round our cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. While we see mirth and beauty and music light and gay, there are frail forms of fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks so same. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. is sighing all the day. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many a days you have lingered all round our cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more.
The surest way to secure peace is to show your ability to maintain your rights. The principles and position of the present administration of the United States, the Republican Party, presents some puzzling questions. While it is a fixed principle with them never to allow the increase of a foot of slave territory, they seem to be equally determined not to part with an inch of the accursed soil. Notwithstanding their clamor against the institution, they seem to be equally opposed to getting more or letting go what they have got. They were ready to fight on the accession of Texas and are equally ready to fight now on her secession. Why is this? How can this strange paradox be accounted for? There seems to be but one rational solution, and that is, notwithstanding their professions of humanity, they are disciplined to give up the benefits they derive from slave labor. Their philanthropy yields to their interest. The idea of enforcing the laws has but one object, and that is a collection of the taxes raised by slave labor to swell the fund necessary to meet their heavy appropriations. The spoils is what they are after, though they come from the labor of the slave.
Let's see, we know this was sung this way because there are these amazing recordings made in 1909 by Polk Miller and his Southern Quartet. And he was in the artillery during the war, the Southern Artillery, and he said, well, we sang it this way. So we go with his word. Hurrah! Hurrah! The Southern Knights, hurrah! Hurrah! For the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Oh, we are a band of brothers, natives of the soil, fighting for the property we gained by honest toil. And when our rights were threatened, the cry was near and far, to raise on high the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. We're singing hurrah! 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 The Southern Knights, hurrah! Hurrah! For the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah! 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 The Southern Knights, hurrah! Hurrah! For the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Now as long as the Union was faithful to her trust, like friends and like brothers, both kind we were in dust. But now with northern treachery attempts our rights to mar, we'll raise on high the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Singing hurrah! 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 To the Knights, hurrah! Hurrah! For the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah! Hurrah! To the Knights, hurrah! Hurrah! For the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Here we go. First man in South Carolina, nobly made the stand, and then came out of Vermont and took her by the hand. It's strictly Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, all raised on high the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Singing hurrah! 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 To the Knights, hurrah! Hurrah! For the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah!
the best tunes I've ever heard, Abraham Lincoln, April 10th, 1865. This is what he said. I see you have a band of music with you, voices. We have 2 or 3. I propose closing up this interview by the band performing a particular tune which I will name. Before this is done, however, I wish to mention 1 or 2 little circumstances connected with it. I have always thought Dixie one of the best tunes I've ever heard. I was born in Memphis, I do too. Our adversaries over the way attempted to appropriate it, but I insisted yesterday that we fairly capture it. Applause, applause for Abraham Lincoln. And the drum roll. I presented the question to the Attorney General, and he gave it as his legal opinion that it is our lawful prize. Laughter and applause. I now request the band to favor me with its performance.
And this song is so emblematic of the complex nature of the war that in Memphis, a native of Memphis would think of it as, a property or something to be proud of. When it's written by a guy from Ohio living in New York City, right, painting his face every night with the Bryant's Minstrels, and has-been. He was a big star. Dan Emmett was a big star in the 1840s. Well, now it's 1859. He's kind of a star of the previous decade, right? He paints his face black every night and goes out on stage and pretends to be an African American in the minstrel show. And this becomes the de facto hymn of the South in a way. They say when it debuted in New Orleans, it was added into a musical number there and was sung by 40 women dressed in Algerian zouave costumes marching around on stage, just to add another wrinkle to it. All these strings are stretching nicely. You want to start it off, Phyllis? Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton, cinnamon seed and sandy bottom. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. There's the land where I was born and heard I almost lost the morning. Look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, away, away, yeah, Dixieland will do.
You are called upon to help save from ruin the noble government under which we have so long enjoyed peace and prosperity, unparalleled in the history of any nation on the earth. Every one of you can do something. 400,000 men are in arms in defense of the government. It is impossible to supply the sick and wounded soldiers with the following articles necessary for their comfort without an appeal to the women of the loyal states to bring out from their surplus stores. Woolen blankets, woolen socks, quilts about 7 feet long by 5 feet wide, woolen undershirts and drawers, woolen or cotton flannel bedgowns, small hair or feather pillows and cushions for wounded limbs, slippers, towels, old and new pillowcases and sheets, cotton shirts, dressing gowns, yarn for darning, buttons and tape for repairing, handkerchiefs, pins, needles and sewing cotton, old linen and cotton for bandages, delicacies for the sick, wines, jellies, dried fruit, cocoa, chocolate, best black tea, illustrated books and magazines for the amusement of the wounded men, etc. Every article named is needed. You can furnish them and so fight half the battle. Every person in town will be called upon by the committee to give something. Let those who can furnish nothing else give money, and the committee can buy articles that are needed.
The sudden call to arms from a state of profound peace found the state of Massachusetts unable to properly clothe and equip the men who were willing to march at a moment's notice to the defense of the national capital without aid from the towns where the volunteers belonged. A number of our citizens belonged to the state militia and expected to be called to march at any moment. 28 persons offered themselves as volunteers and uniforms were provided for them. The committee bought the cloth and coats were made in Boston, and the ladies met at the town hall and made 72 woolen shirts and 28 pairs of pants. When the uniforms were distributed, it was stated that if for any reason any person receiving one should not go to war, he should return his uniform for the benefit of the town. The following men did not go, and when called upon by the committee, refused to give them up. Eli Willis, F.D. Hosmer, Walter Yount, Charles A. Sears, Ebenezer L. Blood, Eliphalet Sears, and James O'Brien. And we have been continually annoyed by some of these holiday soldiers wearing these uniforms about our streets since their return from the fort.
George F. Root was one of the most prolific songwriters of the time. He wrote a number of songs from, he was based in Chicago, or at least his publishers were. And this next song, the Battle Cry of Freedom, was one of his rally songs that he wrote in '62, I believe, when, the way he tells it, when one of Lincoln's calls for 300,000 more men, you heard 400,000 referenced in that Stowe announcement. He said when he heard of that call, immediately this song sprang into his head, fully formed, and he wrote it down, and the next day, on their way to a rally, a famous singing quartet came by and said, "Do you have a new song for us to sing?" And he gave them this song, and they tuned it up, ran through it once or twice, went off to the rally, and he said by the second or third verse, thousands of people were singing along. So that's how these songs function, to get people involved. Whether it helps you understand the politics. When you were singing hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah, we're getting a glimpse into why these young men would leave their homes in Texas and go to Virginia to fight on the front early in the war. When we sing this next song, we're getting a glimpse of why the Northern people were all not all, I shouldn't say all, why some of the Northern people were supporting the war, and why, if you were deciding what to do, what your part would be, what you might start thinking about. Watch for the musical flag. The highest notes of the song are what he's waving out to us as the main message early in the war. Battle Cry of Freedom. I'm going to tune one string down for this one. Yes, we'll rally around the flag, boys, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we'll rally from the hillside, we'll gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom, the Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah, down with the traitor. to the call of 300,000 more. In the battle cry of freedom, and we'll fill the vacant ranks of our brothers gone before. Shouting the battle cry of freedom, union forever, our boys are love, down with the traitor, and up with the sorrow, running round the flag, boys rally once again. Shouting the battle cry of freedom. Well, we'll welcome to our numbers the loyal, true, and brave. Shouting the battle cry of freedom. For although we may be poor, we shall never be a slave. Shouting the battle cry of freedom. Oh, Union forever, our boys come, down with the traitor, and up with the sorrow. So we'll rally from the east and we'll rally from the west. And we'll hurl the rebel crew from the land we love the best. The Union forever, our boys around. Down with the traitor and up with the star. We rally round the flag, boys rally once again. Shouting the battle cry of freedom. This is a wonderful one of the many letters that the Berlin Historical Society has from this time period, and this is just a little excerpt from Mr. Samuel Hodgkins.
So much for putting on airs. Samuel Hodgkins' letter to Berlin from camp near Annapolis, September 24th, 1862. We had a great time here Monday morning. A man from Baltimore came here 2 weeks ago and put up a large building and filled it with sutlers' stores. There was an L in the building, 100 feet long, and used as a dining room for officers who took their meals there. Well, Monday morning, a sergeant of cavalry, a paroled prisoner like the rest of us, and a Massachusetts man, by the way, went in there and paid for his breakfast and commenced to eat it. In comes a captain with a good many airs on for the same purpose. He thought he was better than a man from the ranks, so he told the sutler, Mr. Murphy, that he could not eat from the same table with a private, and ordered him to put the sergeant out, which the sutler proceeded to do. Angry words followed, and a guard called and hurried the sergeant off to the guardhouse. The men outside became excited and crowded around by thousands. The captain who caused all the trouble came out and tried to explain things, only making matters worse. For he said that privates had no right to eat at the same table with officers, and that he would not let them eat with him. Then the men grew furious and pelted him with sods and everything they could lay their hands on, causing Mr. Airy Captain to skedaddle as fast as he could. The men then made a rally on the building, and in less time than it takes to tell, it was torn down and with its contents distributed about the camp. Not even a nail was left on the ground. The whole thing amounted to about $4,000 and was a godsend to many a poor, hungry, half-naked soldier. So much for putting on airs over a private. I went in for some of the spoils and do not feel guilty in the least, and shall go in again under the same circumstances. So ever all tyrants.
This is a song that we found in John D. Billings' book, Hardtack and Coffee, and we'll all get to partake of the hardtack and coffee a little later. He said, once the hardtack, which was called Hard Crackers in 1861, started to be distributed among the men early on in the war, they very quickly came up with this modification of Hard Times Come Again No More. So we'll try it a cappella in our hungriest voices. Everybody now! Let us close our game of poker, take our tin cups in our hands, while we all gather round the cook's tent door, where dried mummies of hard crackers are given to each man. Oh, hard crackers, come again no more. With my pen. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the hungry. Hard crackers, hardtack, come again no more. Many days have you lingered upon our stomachs sore. Oh, hardtack, come again no more. There's a hungry, thirsty soldier who wears his life away with torn clothes whose better days are o'er. He is sighing now for whiskey and throat as dry as hay, sings hardtacks, come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the hungry. Hardtacks, hardtacks, come again no more. Many days you have lingered upon our stomachs sore. Oh, hardtacks, come again no more. Oh, hardtacks, come again no more.
An unidentified Confederate officer to Union officers shortly after Lee's surrender, April 1865. Gentlemen, if we had your songs, we'd have limped you out of your boots. Who couldn't have marched or fought with such songs? Every one of these Yankee songs is full of marching and fighting spirit. I shall never forget the first time I heard Rally Round the Flag. 'Twas a nasty night during the 7 days fight, and if I remember right, it was raining. I was on picket when, just before taps, some fellow on the Union side struck up that song and others joined in the chorus until it seemed to me the whole Yankee army was singing. Tom B., who was with me, sung out, "Good heavens, Cap, what are those fellows made of anyway? Here we've licked them 6 days running, and now we're on the eve of the 7th day, they're singing Rally Round the Flag." I'm not naturally superstitious, but I tell you that song sounded to me like the knell of doom, and my heart went down into my boots. And though I've tried to do my duty, it has been an uphill fight with me ever since that night.
The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and up with the star. Won't we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We have an account from Dwight's Journal of Music.
It is one of the most striking incidents, is that right?
Yes.
On this war, to listen to the singing of the groups of colored people in Fortress Monroe, who gathered at their resorts after nightfall. Last evening, having to visit an officer of the garrison sick in his tent, I passed around by the Fortress Chapel and adjacent yard, where most of the contraband tents were spread. There were hundreds of men of all ages scattered around. In one tent they were singing in order, one man leading an exemplary chorister, while some 10 or 12 others joining in the chorus. The hymn was long and plaintive as usual. Lose my place. In the chorus. The hymn was long and plaintive as usual, and the air was one of the sweetest liners I ever listened to. There was no confusion, no uproar, no discord. All was as tender and harmonious as the symphony of an organ. Who shall dare say that these fellow inheritors with us of the image of the Father and the love of the Son are fit only to be slaves?
Early on in the war, the first summer of the war, 1861, the Union held Fort Monroe and in coastal Virginia, and the Union forces were bottled up in a little bit of land there. And in 1s and 2s and 3s, slaves started escaping from the plantations, especially if their masters ran away because of the Union forces, and crossing lines, entering the Union camp and offering themselves to first, freeing themselves by crossing those lines and then offering themselves to help with the war effort. And Union officers at the time were under strict orders to return all slaves to their masters so as not to anger further Southern opinions. And a Massachusetts man, the General Butler, was in charge of the fort, and he realized, boy, when I send those slaves back to their masters, they're hard at work digging trenches the next day. And so at one point, when the Southern officer comes to collect some of his property and comes to the gates of the fort and says, "You have some of my property in there, and I'd appreciate it if you'd send it back." Mr. Butler says, "Well, this property of yours is contraband of war. This is property that I seize and choose not to hand back. Right? If we capture any of your property, we don't have to hand it back." And the man says, "Well, what about the fugitive slave ban, the fugitive slave law of 1850? You're bound by federal law to return them to me." And Mr. Butler, the lawyer in civilian life, says, "Well, if you were not in open secession, then that law might apply to you. But if you will come back and take an oath of allegiance to the Constitution and the laws of the land, I'll be happy to apply that law to you." Knowing full well that that's not possible at that point. So this song is collected from the singing of the contrabands. The Lord by Moses, Pharaoh said, "Let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead." Let my people go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. No more shall they in bondage toil. Let my people go. Let them come out with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down Egypt's land. Tell haste, Moses, till the sea you cross. Let my people go. Pharaoh shall in the deep be lost. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. The sea before you shall divide. Let my people go. And you'll cross dry shod to the other side. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. All this world is a wilderness of woe. Let my people go. So us all to Canaan go. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down Egypt's land. Tell them that let my people go.
Early in February, an expedition in charge of our Colonel Higginson was sent down the coast, its destination St. Mary's, at the head of St. Mary's River in Florida. On landing, it was evening. Our soldiers, under the charge of Sergeant Robert Sutton, who, when a slave had lived there, took quiet possession of the place. It was a proud moment for Robert when he placed a guard of colored soldiers around the house of his former owner, Madame Alberty, and one of the great rage to the good dame when she discovered the outrage and heard her own nigger, our Bob, give the order to shoot anyone who attempted to leave the house without his permission.
The world turned upside down. Because of course, after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Union Army started taking on and forming colored regiments, right? Under white officers, of course. But then these former contraband, who had brought themselves out of slavery and entered Union lines, suddenly they could be armed, they could be drilled, they could be taught to fight in military formation. And so Robert comes back to his former plantation, and the tables had turned. So a Connecticut songwriter, Henry Clay Work, one of our favorite songwriters at the time, came up with, he's writing for the minstrel stage, some of his songs, but it's fascinating to look at how going from Stephen Foster's minstrel tunes, Ring the Banjo, Dan Emmett's Dixie, just in a few short years, let's take a look at how the minstrel stage has changed forever because of these developments of the war. Note that instead of caricaturing racial caricatures of African Americans, this song sports a caricature of the massa, right? The plantation owner. And what would happen in a lot of these coastal southern areas, they were, in some cases, 15-to-1 ratio, the population ratio of slaves to white families who owned them. So when the Union Army got near, a lot of the white families on the plantations or the overseers would just take off, get out of there. And as some of the slaves told the Union soldiers, oh, it's not because they're scared of you, it's because they're scared of us. They're outnumbered 15-to-1, and they took off. So this song is, again, a northern white songwriter's take on what was going on in the South, reflecting what he was collecting as songs, as stories from the South. Dr. Esther Hawks was right there in South Carolina, teaching literacy to the freedmen, the children of the freedmen. So she was witnessing this, and we pair her quote with the song. There's a great sing-along. It's another ha-ha, ho-ho sing-along. Jump right in there and echo it or do whatever you want with it. Have a good time. Say, now, haven't you seen the massa with the mustache on his face? Going down the road sometime this morning like he's going to leave the place. He's seen the smoke way up the river where the Lincoln gunboats lay. He took his hat, and that very sudden I expect he's run away. Oh, the master run apart, the darkies stay home. It must be now the kingdom coming in the year of Jubilee. Well, he says, put one way, two put the other anyway, 300 pounds.
just after the Battle of Fredericksburg, 1862. During the afternoon, we and the enemy were very near together, with the Rappahannock River only between us, but no fighting going on. Just before sundown, the Yankee band came down to the river bank and commenced to play. Very soon, our bands were on the bank on the other side. The Yankee band would play the popular airs of theirs amid much yelling and cheering. Our bands would do the same with the same result. Towards the wind-up, the Yankee band struck up Yankee Doodle. Cheers were immense. When they stopped, our band struck up Dixie. And everything went wild. When they finished this, both bands, with one accord and simultaneously, struck up Home Sweet Home. There was not a sound from anywhere until the tune was finished, and then it seemed as if everybody had gone crazy. I never saw anything to compare with it. Both sides were cheering, jumping up and throwing up hats and doing everything which tended to show enthusiasm. This lasted for at least a half hour. I do believe that had we not had the river between us, that the two armies would have gone together and settled the war right then and there.
Midst pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. A charm from the skies seems to hallow us there, which seeks through the world is never met with elsewhere. Home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like 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 home. An exile from home, splendor dazzles in vain. Oh, give me my lonely thatched cottage again. The birds singing gaily that come at my call. Give me them with that peace of mind, dear. Then home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like 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 home. To him I'll return, overburdened with care. The heart's dearest souls will smile on me there. No more from that cottage again will I roam. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home.
This was part of Lincoln's second inaugural address, March 4th, 1865. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both the North and South this terrible war as woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in the living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether.
From that vision towards the end of the war, the second inaugural, we'll jump to Julia Ward Howe, Massachusetts poets, or abolitionist Massachusetts poets. Her vision from November 1861, from the first months of the war. She had heard that day in camp, she had heard the men singing John Brown's Body Lies a Mouldering in the Grave, and one of her comrades who was touring the camps with her said, "Don't you think we should have some more stirring lyrics than that to that tune?" And she woke up in the middle of the night with the lyrics formed in her head and grabbed for the pencil to write them down in the darkness. And so we have this as a fitting vision of what the war will become. Thank you so much to Flyleaf for putting this together, and to all of you for being our readers, bringing these voices to life, and we hope this continues from tonight, that we can keep bringing these voices to life and look up new words that bring them to light from your local historical society and share them with your neighbors. That's what this is all about. And sing them, sing them.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrors with his sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I've written in the watchfires of 100 certain camps. They are building him an altar in the evening hymns and dance. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His spirit is marching on. I have read the fiery gospel written in burnished scrolls of steel. As you deal with my condemned, and so with him my grace shall deal. Let the hero born of woman crush the serpent with his heel. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. He
Then turn, and not be alarmed, O libertad. Turn your undying face to where the future, greater than all the past, is swiftly, surely preparing for you.
Well, I looked over Jordan and what did I see? Carry me home. What a big thing, 'cause it's me. I'm gonna carry me home. Sweet Lord, sweet chariot. I'm gonna carry me home. Sweet Lord, sweet chariot. I'm gonna carry me home. Well, sometimes up, sometimes down. I'm gonna carry me home. Yeah, still my soul is down. I'm gonna carry me home. Sweet Lord, sweet chariot. I'm gonna carry me home. Sweet Lord, sweet chariot. I'm gonna carry me home. Thank you very much.
So we'll move downstairs, right?
Before we do that, I would just like to once again thank you to the Hardtacks for coming. Flyleaf has worked in partnership with the amazing Berlin Arts and Historical Society. Many members are here tonight. Big round of applause for them.